Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Ben Newman. I'm a coronavirus researcher, and I'm here to answer your questions based on published literature. So let's go. All right, second part. This is a two-parter. This is the second part of a question from Holly, and once again, good morning, Holly. Thanks for this. Yeah, big question and a lot of good stuff to cover. So verging on the medical side, so I understand if it would be appropriate, if it would not be appropriate for you to answer, but since you're an expert on coronavirus in general, maybe you can. Yeah, fine. The questions that I can't or won't answer are things that have to do with what should I take? Is it okay to take this treatment? Something like that. Those are questions that you need a medical license, insurance, and you should have probably gone to medical school, which I definitely did not, in order to answer. Yeah, and maybe better knowledge of physiology than I have. Yeah, but questions of how do things work, particular viruses, I'm better at. So this one turns out to be, yeah, a question that I can do a pretty good job on. Yeah. Let's see. So, do any of the other known coronaviruses out there cause long term effects? And then, what Holly means by long term effects, I'm referring to how chickenpox can become reactivated later in life and cause shingles. Yeah, because chickenpox gets in there and it never goes away. It's just there until something breaks down and then it comes back. Yeah. There was such a thing as post polio syndrome, yes, for some polio survivors. And some people are lifelong shedders of polio virus, which means they actually have a sort of an ongoing infection that doesn't necessarily ever go away, which is very bad. Anything like that for known human or animal coronaviruses? Oh my gosh, I'm glad you asked. The answer is yes. Yeah. So for human coronaviruses, the answer is no. We know of those 7 coronaviruses, of which this SARS-CoV-2 is one of them, but I am not aware of any what you the way virologists would call this is a persistent infection. And so persistent infection means anything beyond what we would call an acute infection, which is just like an infection that, goes up, goes down, and then is gone. Yeah. short term, and short term in this case can be 3 months sometimes, but yeah, that would still qualify. Anything from like, I don't know, an hour to 3 months. Yeah. I don't know what, you can't get any viruses that actually can do anything in an hour and get cleared. They would just get cleared in that time. But yeah, in mouse hepatitis virus, so mouse coronavirus, definitely this is something that happens. The virus, when it gets to some nerve cells, it can actually persist there, and it can persist for the life of a mouse. Now, caveats: the life of your average lab mouse is something like a year and a half. They usually die of cancer at some point in there. Um, Various kinds of wild mice, though, can live much longer, 15, 20 years, if I remember correctly. It's just these particular ones that we've genetically inbred that are very useful in science, just they do not have long lives on their own. But yeah, yeah. And so that's actually a similar thing to what is happening in chickenpox or shingles. That's the same virus, just first time, second time. Or something like a post polio. I think that's what we would be dealing with potentially. There are a couple things that could mean it's basically anything that you have that was related to the old polio that's still going on. But polio also does, both of these viruses do hit the nervous system, and so chickenpox virus, varicella zoster virus is what it's called in particular, yeah, it does persist in neurons. And so for other coronaviruses, yeah, the virus gets to neurons and it can stay there, and it can stay there basically indefinitely, which is really weird because coronaviruses are usually acute, just sort of one and done and gone. Yeah, but not there. Now, this particular coronavirus has shown at least a little bit of ability to infect some parts of the brain. These have been detected in people who have died of the coronavirus. So these are brain infections that are either lethal or are going along with something else that is lethal. So, yeah, it's not clear whether they are survivable. But theoretically, if the virus can get into a nerve cell, and it seems to have a different receptor that it can use to get into nerve cells, neuropilin, if I remember right, then it could potentially hang around if it gets into the right nerve cell. But right now, the complications where the virus actually gets into the brain, the evidence for this it only suggests that it happens occasionally. This appears to be perhaps not the usual case, but something that can happen in an extreme case. So not the run of the mill COVID, perhaps. Although honestly, without taking people apart and pulling out a little chunk of their brain to check for virus, it's difficult to know for sure, if the person is still alive. And we're very glad that the person is alive, and we don't want to mess around with any of that. Yeah, I certainly would like to keep all the chunks of my brain in my head, and I would imagine that's true for most people. So yes, this does exist in coronaviruses in general, and mouse hepatitis virus is also a beta coronavirus, which is the same group. It's actually a genus that the SARS-related coronaviruses belong to, like SARS-CoV-2 and the original SARS virus and a whole bunch of bat viruses that are kind of in between and around those things, but haven't thankfully caught on in people yet. And eventually they may, but for now, I'm just glad if they stay with bats. That's fine. We'll figure out how to deal with those later. Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's the answer. No good evidence yet that it happens, but there is a pathway where eventually, if it did happen, that's the pathway it's probably going to take. But yeah, it would seem to be a rare thing, at least with the virus as it exists right now and the way it normally infects. And that is wonderful. um, there are, though, cases where it would appear that the virus just lingers. So the longest I had read about was 6 months, but I know of some others where the virus has hung around for a minimum of 2 months and probably longer. They just kind of stopped testing. I believe all these cases are in people with something that is wrong with their immune system. Basically, they're missing some components of the immune system for different reasons. So theoretically, yes, in some people it could, but in general, it doesn't seem to persist with this quite the same mechanism, or uh, like in every single case of chickenpox, the virus will persist, we think, for lifetime. And this is not a virus like that, at least as far as we're able to tell with science at the present. So there we go. I hope that's helpful. Thanks very much. This has been Ask Dr. Ben.